Hi, and welcome to this video. This is a really important video for me. It's related to something that I've been working on a lot with my students over the past year, and it's something I've wanted to share for a while. This video is aimed toward families, parents, teachers, and therapists who are working with students who have difficulty with listening comprehension. My own interest in after two events that happened a little over a year ago. One was a continuing with one of my students. I want to start with my student's story. A little over a year ago, I came down to one of my classrooms to pick up one of my students for a speech therapy session. As class just now, they had been watching a video on YouTube. The video shared new information related to a book the class had been reading, and it was a book that he really liked. I was listening. I really thought I was listening. I don't know what's wrong with me. I didn't want to hear him say that. And so we talked. And when we got to the speech room, I reminded him that listening can be tough for anyone. And he and I had worked before on strategies that we could use when listening was hard. I asked him if he remembered those, and we started talking about what strategies he could use in the situation he had just been in. We said not every strategy would work, but maybe listening to it again or listening to it more slowly to the strategies we talked about might help. I had him look up that same YouTube video on my computer. I asked him, do you know how to play a YouTube video more slowly? And he did. I didn't even know how to do that at the time, but he showed me the settings button in the lower right corner of YouTube videos. And on that settings button, when you click it, you get a selection of playback speeds. He chose to watch that same video at half speed. As soon as the video came on, he was engrossed. He leaned forward. He was listening to every word. I thought it sounded a little slow, but for him, playing it at half speed meant he could hear things, he could pause and repeat things to himself, and after listening for just a while, he stopped the video. He had heard the answer to the question that he hadn't been able to answer in the classroom, and he was beaming. He realized it wasn't that there was something wrong with him. He just needed to use some different strategies to be able to listen and understand. Watching him that day reminded me, even more than the continuing education training that I had done before, just how critical listening comprehension strategies are for many students. Listening is, in its nature, hard. As soon as someone says something and then they stop, we don't have anything to go back on. We just have to hear what they said, get it into our working memory, hold it there until we get who knows what question might come from it. Or if it's a fact that we need to use again later, if maybe the next thing we hear is going to build on it, we need to keep it in working memory and long-term memory so we can have it for later on. So listening is tough, and all of us use listening comprehension strategies at one point or another in our lives. It's something routine, whether it's humming something to yourself, repeating something to yourself, playing something over and over. There are a lot of strategies we use. I tell my students that using a strategy is not something that shows that you're not good at something. It's just a smart thing to do. So this is why I'm bringing this video today for listening comprehension strategies. I wanted to make sure that others had information about some of the tips that I teach my students, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about things that we can do in classrooms, in therapy rooms, in workplaces to help young people with listening comprehension difficulties. So, some of the listening comprehension strategies that I talk to my students about and that are covered in my other video in this series that's geared toward the students are these. The first one is having the students check to see if they are ready to listen. I have one group of students I frequently see right after recess. I can tell you that is not a time when they're usually ready to listen. They've just been outside, they're pumped up, they're amped up, they're still thinking about all the things they did when they were at recess. We have to take a lot of deep breaths and work on that, being just calm and ready to listen before we can really get to anything. So starting with acknowledging to students that listening can be tough when we have a lot of energy and we can't sit still, and giving them tips for how to calm themselves down can be a really useful thing. I know a lot of my fellow teachers do that. The second one that I tell my students is that they should ask if they can hear something again. And I would love to encourage folks to let them ask to hear it again. It's not easy to hear and remember everything we hear. And for some of my students, they don't have the strongest sense. Being able to hear things again helps them identify what they know and what they need to know and gives them a better chance of really understanding what they've heard. That's related to the third tip that I give my students, asking if they can hear something more slowly. For the student in my story, being able to watch that YouTube video at a slower speed was exactly what he needed. We have the chance, giving students the opportunity to hear something at a slower speed can make a real difference in how much that they understand. The fourth strategy, and one that my student used in my story as well, is repeating things to yourself. I know I've done that a million times. Someone tells me a phone number and I say it over and over to myself until I have a chance to get to my phone and put the number in. Repeating things to yourself is a common strategy. In some settings, you may need to do it kind of quietly so you don't distract others, but it does help to keep things fresh in your memory until you're able to use them. The fifth thing that I tell my students, and the sixth one that are kind of connected, are being able to have visuals. Whether it's a written script for what you're going to listen to so you can follow it along, or pictures or illustrations. Things like a YouTube video have video built in, though you want to watch for videos that are too visually flashy and distracting. Sometimes it's almost an overload on the visual system and doesn't really. One of my favorites is set it to music. I get to work with brilliant music therapists where I am at, and they do a song. We all know that there are songs we may have loved in high school, no matter how long ago high school was, that even if we haven't heard the song in years, as soon as it starts, we know all the words. It's set to music. We did it repeatedly, heard it repeatedly when we were kids, and that's just fixed in our memory. Helping students to set something to a rhythm or a chant or hear like a musical version of the information can really help them to listen and understand better. Taking time before answering. Sometimes I just give my students a moment after they've heard things to think about it. Maybe I let them ask me a question about it before I ask them a question. So if there's something that they didn't get, they have the chance to get worked around what they need to understand before I start throwing in more auditory information by asking questions. So giving a little extra time never hurts. 9, getting the question before you listen. Anytime that we're able to help our students by telling them in advance what to listen for, that can be really powerful. So saying in advance, I want you to be listening for 3 different ways that this animal we're studying hunts for food. They know going in, that's what I want. 1, 2, 3, I need to find those 3 things. So just setting things up so you know what to listen for helps. It's like the difference between if I said to you, I'm going to say some numbers now, and then I'm going to ask you to say them back. 1, 2, 9, 6, 5, 4, 8, 7, 8, 3. Not a lot of structure there, not a lot of meaning to those numbers. But if I say to you in advance, hey, I'm going to tell you a phone number, immediately your memory starts expecting a 3-digit area code if we tell them in advance what to listen for before they start listening. Lastly, identifying distractions and helping students to change the channel. Distractions are real, and if we act like they aren't, we're not being honest. We all know we can be distracted sometimes. So I try to make it really apparent to my students, hey, I'm pretty distracted today because I'm worried my son wasn't feeling well. But right now I know I'm here in speech therapy with you and I need to focus on that. So we're going to work together, and I'm telling myself I can distraction can help students to see that it's a common thing and can help to model for them ways that they can handle their own kinds of distractions. As adults working with young people with listening comprehension difficulties, what other things can we do to help them? The first thing I try to ask myself is, what is the goal of the activity that I'm doing? If my goal is to see how successfully my students can answer questions about information that they've only heard once, then that's what I'm measuring, and that's what I'll do. If my goal is making sure they understand what's been heard, then I can really encourage them to use strategies. And most of the time I find my biggest goal is understanding, not just getting a quick snapshot of what they know after hearing something once. The next thing that I try to do is give time between the things I'm saying and to not be too quick to rephrase my questions. When you've asked a question, you've just put more auditory information into the atmosphere. If a student is still trying to remember what they've just heard, asking a question and then changing the way you ask it just complicates the process. So when I can, I try to think about what I'm saying, keep my questions focused and simple, and if I need to say the question again, I try to say it in the same way so that I'm not introducing something brand new. I try to be mindful when I'm working with students who have difficulty with listening comprehension to try to slow my speech down a bit to make sure that they understood everything that I'm saying. The structure of a paragraph and the organization of stories. Sometimes for students, they don't have a clear sense that the main idea of a paragraph is often at the beginning, or that certain phrases in a sentence are modifying other parts of the sentence. And then it's hard for them to answer questions about it. So continually reinforcing that knowledge of sentence grammar, paragraph structure, and the structure of stories can be helpful with improving listening comprehension. I try to let students know in advance what I'm going to teach them, and then teach it to them, and then review it so that they get multiple repetitions within one lesson of the main idea. And I try to repeat the same information, at least in a shortened form, from day to day, so that I reinforce that this is the most important part of what we're saying. Do you remember what we said last time before we go on to the next thing? Lastly, and this for me has been critical, I start with assuming that the student is doing the best they can. It can be easy sometimes when a student isn't answering or seems to be just guessing when they answer to think they weren't trying, they weren't listening, they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I try to start from a place of saying, right now and letting them use strategies, teaching them strategies, or just thinking of the way that I instructed them and can help to adjust and work around those listening comprehension difficulties. I don't want any of my students to get to that point of thinking to themselves, what's wrong with me? When really what needs to be changed is the way I'm presenting things or the way that they've learned how to use strategies so that they can listen and learn better. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you'll add any comments with listening comprehension strategies that you have taught people or strategies that help students with listening comprehension difficulty. Have a good day.